On, there we go. Good evening. This is the Planning and Zoning Commission, and we're at our regular meeting here on March 27th at 6 p.m. at the City Council Chambers located at 405 Municipal Drive, Kennedale, Texas, and 76060 on a very sunny day. It's a joke, folks. All right. I'd like to go ahead and start off the meeting. Call to order. Ma'am, can I get a roll call, Madam Secretary?
Yes, sir. Chair Brown,
I am present.
Vice Chair Malkowski,
Present.
Chair Jones,
Present.
Chair Martinez.
Present.
Everyone's present, sir.
You can have it back. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you very much. Item number 2 is going to be public comment. We do welcome any public comments. Anyone wishing to speak can do so at this time. I do not see anybody in the gallery at this point. So we will move on from opening and closing the public comment at 6:01. Work right into the regular agenda. Consent agenda item A1 is going to be approval of the minutes from February 27th, 2025. Does anybody want to discuss those minutes? I do have the large novel right here. Any open discussion? All right, well, I'd like to present the question to motion to accept the minutes.
I motion we approve the minutes.
All right, can I get a second?
I second.
All right, I'd like to vote at this time. All in favor to approve the minutes from February 27th, 20, wow, I'm by about 26 years behind here. February 27th, 2025 regular meetings. I'd like to get all in favor to approve the minutes. All in favor? Any opposed? All right, motion passes 4-0, ma'am. Item B, this is going to be items for individual consideration, discussion, and/or actions. 1, update the Universal Developmental Code. Item 1, staff, take it away.
Good evening, Commissioners. Pleasure to be with you tonight. We're going to talk about the Development Code, and if you recall, January, February, brought a couple some land use tables. We talked about land uses and its relationship to the comprehensive plan that was adopted last year. And one of the requests was, can we get a Word document that we can edit as needed? So we've sent that all to you. The one that you have there that you've been provided actually has 2 columns, and I just want to talk a little bit about that. Our consultants, Dunaway, that's been assisting us with this update, have helped us shave about 100 pages out of this development code. And so if you've ever had an opportunity to stop by the office and I pulled out that development code, you saw it's in a 5-ring binder. So we may be able to go back to a 4-ring or maybe a 3-ring binder. But what we did is we updated, removed a lot of redundancies, updated some definitions. We did create in this draft, there is what's called a transit-oriented mixed-use development overlay district. So we'll talk a little bit about that tonight. In my staff report, I did mention that we're still working on the entertainment district overlay and trying to identify the limits of that. So that's not in this draft. Again, it's just a draft, but it is, I would say, probably a formal draft because last time it was just a couple pages on a document. This one is the full thing, and you'll notice that it's hyperlinked. So for those that are online, and if you ever visit our development code that we list online, you do a lot of scrolling because the version that we have wasn't properly hyperlinked. And so this one makes navigating the development code a whole lot easier. So I can just click, and each section, and this will pull up, you'll be able to navigate it a whole lot easier. What we also did is we changed some spatial requirements in our residential districts to make them more consistent with the dimensional requirements that are already provided. So let me give you an example. We had like the R4 district, the minimum lot width and depth was 70 by 100, but the minimum square footage of the lot was higher than that. just doesn't make sense sometimes. We did make some changes to R2, R3. That's why we want to bring that to you. What do you guys feel about that? We'll also have the same discussion with council when that comes around. But in addition to spatial requirements being updated, we looked at land uses in town, and we are not removing any existing land uses, so we don't want to create any nonconformities. In the development code, we are looking to increase or add additional land uses in those zoning districts. So we've done that with commercial offerings, we've done that with some residential offerings in town, but I do want to highlight that as well. We did clean up on definitions. So what I mean by that is when I talk about how do we define multifamily? How do we define a townhome? How do we define, I mean, a duplex is pretty self-explanatory, right? People are familiar with that. But what about a triplex? What about a quadplex? And one of the deficiencies we had in our existing code is that we call everything multifamily 3 units or more. Well, if you want to build a triplex, which in some zoning districts you can do today, is that a triplex or is that multifamily? Because in the same zoning district, it said multifamily was prohibited. And so it caused landowners in town some confusion, and it caused staff some confusion. So what we've done is we've identified obviously single family detached and attached. So a detached single family would just be a normal single family home. A single family attached would be like a townhome. And we have defined that as 3 or more units that are attached on an individual lot. We've done the same thing with a triplex. A triplex that's what it is. It's 3 units that are attached, and that's all, right? So we've defined what that is. We've done the same thing with a fourplex, or what a quadplex is where you would have 4 of them. Again, previously, if you had 4 units that were attached, that would be considered multifamily, and we're not saying that anymore. We're saying that multifamily is now when you have 5 residential units attached or more. And so we didn't change anything as far as what you could do here or what you could do there, but we just clearly made a clear definition of what that is. We've also looked at expanding some residential offerings to create that mixed-use district within our commercial districts, in addition to the overlay. So we talked about that last time. And then, again, some more cleanup. We did change some approval authorities, right? And so a lot of cities regarding when the state put in the shot clock on a plat submittal, it gave cities 30 days to take action on it. Otherwise, it's been approved by law. And that's happened here in Kennedale, unfortunately, because the city didn't have staff. It was submitted to the city and they didn't review it properly, and it got approved already. A lot of cities have now, because as long as it meets the zoning district, cities can no longer deny them. And so the state came in and said, if it meets the zoning district, you have to approve it. And if you don't, it opens us up to some liability. I got to reiterate how important that is, right? So because of that, it's more of just a ministerial act. So rather than bringing it here, then bringing it to city council, we've just kind of simplified that. And we were looking at making that just a staff approval, similar to our minor plats. We do want to take preliminary plats back, come to P&Z for preliminary plats. So what that would be is if we had like a subdivision, that could be residential or commercial, we still want to bring that before you. We're still looking at site plan approval, so you still have to have a site plan in town. But we're defining that further, and we put a threshold of 6,000 or more. And that number is not an arbitrary number. That number is because at 6,000 square feet, now you got to sprinkle the building in town, particularly for commercial. Anything under 6,000, you don't have to sprinkle it. And so when we're dealing with a small building like that, we'll probably keep the site plan more on the staff level. But if we have anything major like a business park come through, a big shopping center come through, that obviously come before planning and zoning for site plan approval. We also looked at, there's 2 things I want to highlight, is we addressed retaining walls in town. We had a standard that says retaining walls got to be max 5 feet, and then they got to go out 10 feet, up 5 feet, 10 feet, kind of creating a pyramid. And we removed that particular language out of that because it doesn't really give respect to the engineering design that could happen. And so we want to provide staff, we want to provide developers, engineers, design professionals that flexibility to work within their discipline. But one of the things we did add is in the parking, in Chapter 12, or Article 12, we put in place guardrails now. So any elevated parking surfaces in town, not just a parking garage. A parking garage already has a requirement for a guardrail or a vehicle barrier in the building code. But if, let's say you had a change in topography in town, there wasn't a requirement that said you had to provide a guardrail. And so we clearly defined what that is now. So anytime that there is a elevation change, if I'm parked here and I got a drop off that's greater than a foot, I got to provide a vehicle barrier or a guard. If we also clearly defined it that if the parking space is here and you have a buffer area that's sloped or anything, and then you have a drop off, you still have to provide a guard at the parking area within anything within that 5 feet barrier. So we wanted to make sure we had that.
Do y'all define out exactly what type of barrier is needed? Or is it just a curb stop, or is it like?
Great
depending
question.
On the elevation?
We do. We actually call out that it has to meet the design and load capacities of Chapter 17 of the International Building Code. And in Chapter 17 of the Building Code, it has those load requirements for vehicle barriers in that. And then we also specifically state that curb stops have to be provided to prevent encroachment, but they are not considered guards or vehicle barriers. So now we have that clearly defined in the development code. So again, just to reiterate, there hasn't been a lot of changes in the development code. It's cleanup. It's dealing with some of the gaps within the development code. But you were sent the UDC early on, the draft. I've since the posting, since we've sent you that, I have I've found one or two areas that we still need to fix on the in the draft, and I'll talk a little bit about what those are. But what concerns, questions, commentary do you all have?
Not at this time for me.
Okay. Let's go into 2.8, which this is our land use tables. And what I mean by some of the areas that we'll have to do some correcting is that some of these tables are missing this column here, which is the transit-oriented development column. And then at the end, we'll also have room to put in the overlay district for the entertainment district. And so we'll add that as well. So I saw that we're missing those. And then if you scroll through the document, every table should have this header. And we've identified a couple tables, I'll show you, that don't have it. And so it didn't transfer over when they did the link. So like, for example, this one should have a header and it doesn't. So we're doing some typos on that. Anything that you see that's highlighted in red or yellow, we've clearly defined or it's new. Particularly if it's highlighted in yellow, that is a new addition. And so we'll talk, at least you'll notice all this is yellow, right? Because this is a new column. This transit-oriented development is a new column. So these land uses are not new to the city, but they're new to the development or this particular code. Let me give you an example. So let's go over the commercial section of it. Again, you'll notice majority of the document, it's not yellow. So those are land uses as they are today. But here's one, for example, in residential offerings. So in the staff report, I talk about expanded residential offerings, expanded commercial offerings as well. This whole table is dealing specifically with residential in town. You'll notice daycares, group home daycares. I have a comment over here, and if you scroll over to the right, this is where if you've got any comments or anything that you want to add to that, feel free to do that. Just shoot me a copy once you're done so I can get it over to the consultants and look at what those comments are. If you have a question, let's get that answered. And then we'll move forward from that. But for example, we have how do we define what a group home daycare is? The state has a provision for folks that licensing for certain types of daycares, foster homes. And our code right now, depending on how many kids there, right now the threshold I think is 6 or 7. It requires a special exception for them to operate within a residential neighborhood. That conflicts with this other state law. And what I mean by that is that some of those types of group homes or daycares for kiddos, minors we're talking, the government is not, or municipalities aren't to, it's sort of like HIPAA, right? You can't expose them, you can't identify them. And by having a special exception at a property where they reside at, there is a potential that those kids would be identified as having, like, I don't know, special needs or part of that particular assistance program. And so we want to be mindful of that. And so we're looking at better defining that in town. You'll notice, here's one of the things that I noticed that we need to fix is that this draft came from a different draft, but you'll notice dwellings multifamily, right? I don't want to catch any more grief than I already have in town, right? So I'm putting this out there. This right here is our Old Town District. Previously, this was permitted. You could do multifamily in Old Town District. There's a separate ordinance that was adopted a year or two after this went into effect and actually removed multifamily from Old Town. And so here in this draft, you'll notice a P there. I've got to go back and get that removed because, again, we don't want to create any nonconformities. But I'll let you guys tell me what you think about that. If that's something that if you want to leave it in, we can. Again, City Council will have opportunity to further revise it. But you'll notice now we have a new definition for dwellings, upper floor, lofts. These are specifically for mixed use only, so these aren't just apartment complexes. And you'll notice in the commercial districts, we've got a P here, permitted by right. And so what we're going to do is reference some of the design standards that are in the mixed use district that they would have to meet in order to do that. So we're not saying we're going to go ahead and allow apartments to go into commercial districts. No, it's to create a mixed use by right or by default in those districts. So if they want to put an upper level apartment loft or luxury loft, some of those developments that you referenced a couple months ago, they could if they design it a certain way. And if you look at, there's a chapter here, which is Article 5. Article 5 used to be the village district. You won't see that. It's in this draft, but it's been moved to an appendix. So it will no longer be a zoning classification or a district in town, but we do have property that's zoned urban village. And so if we completely remove it, that creates a nonconformity in town. So future staff, existing staff, if those properties ever develop or when they develop, they'll be able to use this document to design those particular properties. And right off the top, I think we've got about 4 pieces of property in town. Actually 5. I can think of 5 that are currently zoned urban village that haven't been developed. And so it's important that we keep that. But when you get an opportunity, if you haven't already, please go through this particular section. You'll notice it is very specific on how things are supposed to be developed. This is that overlay district that we talked about placing strategically in town. So we talked about the Oakcrest addition over there behind QT and by the highway. The comprehensive plan also identifies a section in the center of town and Old Town near the railroad area to put a overlay district there or for some sort of transit-oriented development. So we'll be looking at that as well. But in here, you're going to see a variety of residential offerings that we currently that you don't see here in Kennedale, but you do see around in a lot of places. So these definitions aren't new to Kennedale. We just haven't seen any really built. And so we have villas, right? We have row houses. You have obviously townhouses. So those are more on the single-family detached type structures. And what those are is, it's a single-family home, it's just on a smaller lot, right? And so if you go to maybe some historic districts where the lots were really narrow, but they had an alleyway, right? And people really didn't park in front of their homes, they parked in the alleyways, and people just kind of walked around. It kind of has that idea. So if you go to Euless Veterans Park, there's a development over there to that extent, has some row houses, some type of villas. There's one in North Hills that is very popular, and it's designed that way. So this, if they want to do a detached single-family structure, it'll allow for some variety there. There's also standards that are specific to if they decide they want to do multifamily or townhomes. The townhomes themselves, those spatial requirements have been changed that make it makes sense now. Because before, if you wanted to build a townhome, we had two stipulations. One, it had to be rear entry, right? So you couldn't have a garage in the front of a townhome. That doesn't always work. The townhome itself doesn't need to be that wide. It's that wide because of the parking garage. So we would say, hey, you have to have a minimum 40 feet wide for one townhome. Again, one section of a townhome. That's pretty wide. And half of that would be just the garage. But we didn't allow them to put the garage up front anyway. So if we take that garage and we put it to the rear, now we don't need all that space, right? You still have the same unit, you just have the parking in the back. And actually, a lot of single-family homes are being designed that way now. Things kind of going back to how things used to be. So you'll see a townhome, a minimum lot width now, where we've got in here, it's 22 feet wide. And it sounds like it's real narrow, but it works because next to it, you got another townhome, right? You're not going to see the lot lines. What you're going to see is the end result of a block of townhomes that you see anywhere else. You just don't see all the parking in the driveways up front. You see it in the back, in the alleyway. So that's where that is a change in the townhome district specifically, but also in this mixed-use district. That's a change here. So, and then there's also some design standards when you get to mixed-use development, if it's a commercial offering. So again, row homes, villas, just a variety of single-family structures, single-family attached structures, multifamily, and then mixed use. So we have a lot more design standards here than we've ever had before. And that's specific to those overlay districts. Again, not all over town, not in the districts that are zoned multifamily or anything that gets rezoned to multifamily. This is only in specific parts of town as council directs. Moving forward, most of these other articles, your plan development article, employment article, general provisions, those have not changed. Our sign ordinance, we've made some minor adjustments in there. Subdivision design hasn't changed. I am having Public Works go through that to just make sure that our street widths, our cul-de-sacs, block lengths, everything like that is consistent with their criteria manual. And I'm trying to think what else is notable to talk about. We have the authorities. Let's look at that. So there have been some changes here. And again, I spoke to that mainly in plat approvals, replat requirements. The state changed some rules now where we don't have to do public hearings, but we still have to notify people of a replat. I'm sorry. Let me,
Is there going to be any additional aesthetic requirements, especially in the commercial buildings?
I believe there have been some that added in chapter 6. I'll double check that. We'll try to mirror that language that's in the chapter 5. Today, we don't really have much on it. With regulating building materials or our inability to do that, that changes some things. I think it was 23. Let me double check something. So again, you'll see some items here in green. When you're scrolling through that, go ahead and review those. For whatever reason, I can't seem to be to get to it. Thank you, Tina. Article 22, review. I got a table in here. There we go. Okay, so public notice requirements, those obviously haven't changed. There are some, I'll need to look at that. Just had it pulled up. Any thoughts on the land use tables? Any thoughts about, in the overlay district, the transit-oriented overlay district, we did increase density there in those areas. And you'll notice in that chapter, it caps it at 24 units an acre. If someone's going to build multifamily in the Oakcrest addition in that particular area, or where council puts that overlay district, right? And so that did increase, but in the multifamily, townhome, every other thing, everything stayed the same on 8 units. And again, that's the thing, we talked about that, I think, early on in I think it was January. Any thoughts?
So with the definition of multifamily now being 5 units and above, and we've now defined quadplex, triplex, duplex, how do they fit in with our land use tables? Because like we still just have that multifamily designation. And so we asked a question earlier about what do we our thoughts on multifamily in a certain category in Old Town, but that's at 5 units and above now, right? So how would someone who is looking to build like a triplex in there or something like that, something smaller,
Right.
how would they look and read those tables?
So in 2.8 is just the overall land use. We're just talking about definitions, what you can and can't do, where in town. You'll go to the individual article for that zoning district to get the spatial requirements, and that's where we list the density. And so in Old Town, for example, or let me pull up, Old Town. So here you'll have the lot areas. Again, none of this has changed. We're probably looking at Old Town 1 to maybe change that back to 50 so that's all consistent. We got Old Town 1 was a little different in the sense that in Old Town 1 today, you got 50-foot lots, but this has 60, right? So those lots predate the ordinance. I'm not sure as to why they bumped it up to 60 or why it's 60. We're probably looking at just having consistency throughout all of Old Town and just a 50-foot lot period. You'll notice there's some differences here, 60 by 120. These other ones are 50 by 100, 50 by 80. Typically in your center of town, you don't really want a big lot because you do want to create some density to get some other types of variety in there. And that's what creates that walkable feel in the area. Sidewalks eventually come, but this is within the zoning district themselves is where you'll see the spatial requirements. So if I'm looking in R1, R2, or townhome, I'll go to that Article 3. We'll find the spatial requirements here. You'll notice that what this number comes from is when you just simply multiply width by lot. We did make a change in the agriculture AG district. If you're going to have a septic, you need a minimum acres. That hasn't changed. But if we have city sewer, we have a lot of property that's AG out here. I talk to landowners that have family members that want to build a home for, right? And right now, before it was an acre on it. With an acre, you couldn't get an ag exemption anyway. But what you could do is they want to be able to build a home for you know, their daughter that just got married or their relative or something like that. And so to have that, if we have city sewer available, this number isn't a new number because it's simply the product of 80 by 125, right? I was having to tell folks, well, I want to carve up my land for my kids, right? How do I do that? Well, this one says your minimum lot width has to be 80 feet and the lot depth has to be 125, but the lot that you carve up has to be a minimum acre square footage. Well, that's not 80 by 125. So they're kind of looking at me perplexed, and I'm like, I don't understand it either. But let's look at that. Let's discuss that. Let's make a change or propose a change. And so does that cause any concern for anybody here? I mean, I'm gonna have the same conversation with council, but if you have city sewer available, I don't see why somebody couldn't create a 10,000 square foot lot on an AG property. They could do that, and then they wouldn't have to really deal with zoning changes or anything like that. Yeah, zoning changes are a big discussion at the state right now, and so I imagine our code, depending on what comes out of committee, will need to get adjusted again. You know, maybe in another year or two to be compliant with whatever the state puts on here. What they're talking about, and this is related to the development code, is that prohibiting cities from, you know, putting in a minimum square footage, period, right? So that tide's coming at some point. But again, does anybody have any issues with the R4? Again, it said 8750 before, but the minimum lot width and depth was 70 by 100, so we just made that 70. It makes it easier to, when you're siting, putting a lot out, you got a piece of land, you want to carve it up, just makes the math work a whole lot easier. But any issues with that? No? Okay. You'll notice townhome district, it's a lot smaller, it's 22 by 88. But that's again because we don't need a 40-foot wide lot. If someone wants to put front entry, they could, but this is the minimum, right? So at the minimum, you have to do this. We do want the parking in the back, but if you have a narrow strip of land, you can't always do that. Which means they have to apply for variances and have to go through a bunch of more red tape, right? So we just want it to make sense. Make it make sense is what I'm always asked. This right here is another typo. It should say not 352 feet high. It should say 35. So again, there's some cleanup that we're doing. You'll notice, I don't think our density here, where do we have that? 8 right here. So that hasn't changed. That hasn't changed, right? So I know that's going to be a big, folks are going to be looking at that, but anything I can add, or does everybody understand the ask that we have if, when you get this document, use the tabs to add comments so we can look at?
I do have one question. There was something we brought up last time we looked at this. Is this considered a living document we have here, or is this something we should be seeing those changes or mark?
Yeah, it's living, so it's,
Okay.
let me,
The reason I asked that is on page 13, Article 2. You still have manufactured homes not allowed, manufactured homes, trailers, fixed dwelling not allowed, but we have manufactured homing subdivisions allowed.
manufactured home. That's going to be my question about the trailer house. Page 13?
Yeah.
We did make we have a change to that, so that obviously we'll put a P back in that if it's not there. I thought we caught that, because when we had a meeting with the consultants, we actually brought that up specifically. Manufactured. Oh, I'm looking at multiple. No, we made that correction. So the one that you were sent earlier, before the agenda was posted and everything, just that doc, so I could start doing, looking at it. And that was brought up. We've since made that change here. And so and then you'll see another definition here for modular home. So we're gonna better define that. Modular homes is really offsite construction. And so, it's not new, but a lot of the new commercial construction is going to modular. And I don't see why we couldn't, I mean, you can build a single-family home and a modular home, it's gonna look the same. It's just a pre-built panel. It's still wood, bricked on the outside. I mean, it looks the same. It's on a permanent foundation. So we'll be looking at that as well. But yeah, we did make that correction. Any other comments, suggestions?
So there's no land, or there is, maybe I didn't understand right. There's a lot of friends that want to buy a piece of property here, but they can't afford to build a house, so they just want to put a trailer house. Is that what you're saying, or am I?
So when that, yeah, so in our manufactured home district, if it's a manufactured home, HUD home, it has to be in a manufactured zone property. So if you had an R1, R2, AG property, you wouldn't be able to put a manufactured home in those areas. It has to be zoned for manufactured home. Now, so that's not saying they can't do it. It's just they have to do a zoning change to manufactured home to allow for that to go in. The state's also looking at that as well. So meaning, can a city prohibit somebody from doing that in any residential district? Right now, our zoning does dictate and regulate that. But if they remove that, there wouldn't be anything that we could do to control that.
So is there going to be like a temporary variance or something like that? For an example, someone buys a couple acres of land, they're in the process of building the home itself can be 8 months long for the build. They want a temporary location. Can they bring something in temporary location to allow for temporary housing instead of rezoning something, which is more of a permanent action? Is there going to be a variance put in place for something like that?
Yeah, that's actually something you can do today. You can, a temporary use, there's a section in here.
Okay, so that falls under the temporary. That's what.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
I follow. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, so if that were to happen, and actually our recreational vehicle section here, our RVs have a provision in there that allows it has a time frame on when you can't do that, but if they could apply if they needed to do that. I don't think we'd probably want to see that in some of the infill development, but like on the west part of town where you got a lot of acreage, you probably never ever see it. So it's something that I think, and as long as they got a building permit submitted, it's going through and they're just doing the construction, I don't see why we couldn't look at that. Okay, y'all, well, any other questions?
Yeah, I was going to say the reason I piggybacking off that was it wasn't specifically on the residential side. So it does tie in under, shall I say, ties into it, basically clauses into it.
Yeah. Well, that's the update I have for y'all. Again, the process, we'll continue refining this. We'll bring it back to you next month. And if we're comfortable with it, if you guys are comfortable with it, we'll stick it on the agenda, and it could be an item for action. If we feel that we're at that point, we have to do public notification. The state has changed that. So we have to notify everybody in town. So we'll be sending out a postcard, keep our costs down. But we'll have to do public notification for a public hearing, when this comes to you for action. Then it will go to city council. I'll workshop it with city council. They'll probably do 1 or 2 readings, go through it, make some changes, talk about it. When they take action, we'll have to do another public hearing on it and notify everybody again on that before it actually gets adopted. These overlay districts in Oak Crest and some of the other areas in town, the entertainment district, when those come in, the process for that will be not unlike a zoning change. Even though we're not changing zoning per se, like we're putting an overlay on top, we're adding additional uses, we're not taking away uses, it's still considered a zoning change, and so we still have to notify everybody. So you're looking at possibly 3 public hearings. One for the overlay one for each of the overlay districts, and then, but before we can do that, we have to create them. So the first one will be the adoption of this new updated development code. And then it'll either be at the same meeting or the subsequent meeting is to install those overlay districts. I'd like to do it at the same meeting, just to makes it easier for Tina and myself, mainly Tina. But that's how that's going to pan out. So with that, thank you for your time. Thanks for being here.
Jed, one quick question about those entertainment districts. Are these being looked at, now, if I'm off base on this, by all means, reel me back in, but are these being looked at with already a lens in place of ideas of things that might actually be up and coming or interest in those areas, or are they just potential just in case?
Yes, we're trying to use some foresight in what could happen. We do have things on the horizon, I would say, out there that would allow for some expanded recreation use out there, but it's mainly also what's going to accompany that, right? What's compatible with that? And so that entertainment district is not just looking at outdoor golf course or Top Golf or, you ever been to those new Andretti places, indoor, those things are phenomenal, right? But what's around it, right? Is there other housing that could go around it? Is there restaurant use that could go around it? So in that sense, we are trying to look at that. We're limited in space here in town, but we are looking at that particular.
I was just curious if you had anybody approach the city saying, hey, is this something viable that would be in the city? And that's what's prompted maybe a greater investment or interest in.
We have had folks come up and inquire about some improving existing facilities. And when they found out we already our comprehensive plan last year talked about an entertainment district, that they were like, oh, a lot of folks have some hesitancy when they come to the city, that how's the city going to feel about this? So when they heard that, hey, we're already working on that, they were relieved to hear, I'd say.
Anything else? Anybody? Well, thank you very much, Nathan. You have a wonderful, happy birthday. And with that, I would like to ask the question for a motion of adjournment. Can I get a motion?
I make a motion that we adjourn.
Can I get a second, please?
I'll second.
All in favor of adjournment? All right. No opposed at 6:43. We are adjourned, ma'am. Thank you very much, everybody.